Welcome back to the Human Perspective. Today we're going to have two people on. So we have Sandy Ho and Teresa Nguyen. And Sandy, could you quickly give us a little background about who you are and what you look like today?
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Sandy Ho speaking, and I am a Ho born and bred. My parents are from Vietnam and Hong Kong. So I'm a disabled Asian American and queer woman who is a community organizer and disability policy researcher. I am wearing a black t-shirt that says "Never Again" in teal, and then there's a person with their fist raised, and then a pink triangle in the back. I have dark wavy hair, and I'm wearing rainbow glasses.
Thank you. Teresa.
Hi guys, it's Teresa Nyugen, and I'm wearing a gray t-shirt. It features a band of my friends, and it has a logo of the wheelchair logo, a sports logo, and then a picture of a tent. And the text says wheelchair sports camp. Let's see, I'm an Asian American woman. I have a long, dark brown and kind of blonde hair. It's curled today. My parents are also from Vietnam, both of them. And so I'm also an Asian American woman. And they were both from Vietnam, and I was born here in Denver, Colorado. So mixture of identities there.
So I'm Judy. Today I'm wearing a navy blue t-shirt with two squares, and I'm again in our foyer. If we could just spend like a couple of minutes talking about when you think about your families, what do you see as some of the differences?
Like as a woman with a disability, I now kind of look back at being aware at how independence is defined in both cultures. And how different it is, and that maybe that's why I struggled with the meaning of independence growing up as a child with a disability, as a teenager with a disability. It was really because I was grappling with two cultures, right? The Asian definition of independence is a little bit more of interdependence, at least from what I have known and grown up with. Everybody does everything for each other, and it's really not anything that has to do with disability. It's just a multi-generational kind of model of life for my Vietnamese parents. And so that I think allowed me to be very supported, but also be very sheltered as a kid with disability. And then, you go to school and you have friends in America, and you learn that, the other model of independence is really just how do we sustain ourselves by doing everything that we can to support our individual self without having to rely on people. And so I would say just balancing those two differences has kind of helped me adapt to disability. Some days I am super, super independent, love it, embrace it. And then some days I can't be. And I'm okay with that, because that's also normalized in the Asian community, having to depend on others for things, especially when my disability, gets in the way. If I have surgeries or if I fracture a bone, I'm definitely not going to be independent. And so it's helped me accept that in a lot of ways, and also not feel so hardly like I am a burden to society, just because I grew up with kind of both.
Thank you. Sandy.
This is Sandy speaking. Yeah, absolutely. Just continuing with what Teresa had shared, I completely agree. I think that there were definitely similarities in my childhood growing up as well. Like, for instance, I am my parents' only child with a disability, and I have two brothers. I'm the middle. I'm also the only girl, and so that adds another, dynamic to my experience for sure. But I think that the ways that I came to understand independence and care, and how care is accessed and given, were really different between what I experienced in by American public school settings versus caregiving in my family and my relatives and in my community, where it was very much community oriented, family oriented, and you kind of put family first rather than having it be kind of this individualized, like almost feels like a little bit transactional in a way. And I think like that, it made it so I was comfortable expressing the care that I need that I don't think I would have been as comfortable with had I, not had the family and culture that I do depend on. And I think that this is also something that I remember growing up, my parents would show up at the IEP meetings, the individualized educational planning meetings that I had as an elementary school student. And, many times the goals listed on the IEP would be, some sort of independence related goal for me. And I think for my parents, that was kind of frightening for them, not kind of like scary, but it framed an educational experience that seemingly was the goal for me to get away from them and to get out of the house and just be on my own. And that wasn't my parents or my family's bar or measurement of what they had in mind for me or like what they thought of as educational success. So yeah, I think like these two experiences are in parallel with one another, I think, but the ways when they cross paths, it was definitely brought on some confusing moments for sure.
I really appreciate this discussion and makes me think that we should do another program that really looks at this whole issue of independence and interdependence, because I don't think the term independent living is really meant for people to do things on their own. But it is definitely a US word and definitely something that, we hear discussed in many other countries, exactly as you're framing it, where the role of the family is intergenerational and no one is looked at as being quote unquote independent, whether you have a disability or not. How did the two of you meet each other?
Growing up, being the only child with a disability in my family, and then predominantly I would be only student who had a visible physical disability up until like high school. I was taught and it was explained to me that I was born with a really rare disability. When I came across the OI community online as like a young tween, I was shocking that like all of a sudden, this is not so rare and random as sometimes the adults in my life had made it seem. And so when I came across other folks in the OI community, like Teresa and others, like that was definitely for me the kind of on ramp into the ways that I think our paths initially crossed. And then recently we had the opportunity to work together when I invited Teresa to be a part of a project that is addressing these like systems and entities that work to support public health data. And we're trying to look at ways in which that system can be improved when it comes to reflecting disability population public health data.
So, about how old were you when you met Teresa?
I don't even know, Teresa.
Do you remember Teresa?
Gosh, I remember, let me think. And again, this is kind of like an internet friendship. And so I remember meeting Sandy or like chatting with Sandy. I want to say 10 years ago, but I could be absolutely wrong. So I would have been 23.
Yeah, and we're around the same age. So yeah, in our like early 20s.
Yeah, yes.
I find your stories very relevant because both of you have gone into professions that are outside where many people go, disabled and non-disabled people. And so, and you're also both working in the area of health, various aspects, and you're both really valuing research. So if we could, for a couple of minutes, I'd really like to talk about research and what you see as the importance of research in being inclusive of disability, and what you see as some of the barriers that exist from the disability community and the professional community in looking at the value of research.
So if you had told me like 5 years ago that I would be working in a academic research institute, I probably would have laughed and rolled my eyes and been like, no. But here I am, proudly as the research project manager of the Community Living Policy Center at Brandeis University. And, you know, it took me some time to understand the relationship and connection and why data and community-driven data is necessary in activism and policy development, and like how those two are bridged together. And that being said, though, you know, and as somebody who has been in academia for about 3 years now, I also recognize the immense barriers that academia has, and kind of, you know, the ways that disabled people can be barred from whether it's furthering their education or career opportunities. Academia isn't the most accessible place or the most accessible field by any means. And, you know, I think that has been challenging for the disability community to build that pipeline of professionals and folks who do have the tools and education and experiences to do the data analysis, to do the survey development, to, you know, lead research and to be present in asking the questions that our community needs to have asked. Because prior to a lot of this work, it was folks who don't identify or are not from the disability community, you know, thinking up research questions that were not from the community, and so came across in ways that kind of really just overlooked our community priorities. And so that's what's so valuable about the Community Living Policy Center, is that we do disability-led and disability-driven research. So that had kind of pushed me over to the side a little bit more. And I also know that this is not a commonplace thing that happened, and it should be happening more for sure.
Teresa, could you share with us what, because I know your role has been a little bit different than Sandy's, and maybe you could talk about why you see research as being valuable and what you see as some of the barriers, both within the disability community in valuing research, and what you've maybe had to be doing in order to convince other researchers who have not necessarily done work in the area of disability that it's relevant.
Oh gosh, I will try my best, Judy. So I have a public health background. I would say personally, before I even knew what public health was called, I was very interested in the healthcare system, in Medicaid, mainly because I utilized it growing up, and then disability healthcare and how those, like, all those systems interplayed. And so I guess there's a word for that, and it fits into public health. I didn't know that. And I got my graduate degree in public health because I was fairly interested in how the gap had existed for healthcare being available and adequate and quality for kids with disabilities, but there is a big gap in the quality and the amount of care available for adults with disabilities. And so I went in and tried to study kind of community and behavioral health because of that. And I would say that my first job out of graduate school really lined up the my realization of the importance of data and research in the disability community. I was kind of the community liaison and engagement person for our state Medicaid office in Colorado on a specific bill pertaining to the Money Follows the Person program. So a program dedicated to transition individuals out of institutions back into the community. And we were, I think, on year 2 of 5 in proving that we had the data to sustain this financial program that would help folks move back into the community. And so that's kind of when my research hat kicked in, and I was like, okay, we need numbers to show. There's no way we're just going to be able to prove that this is sustainable through people wanting to do the right thing. We need numbers and we need facts. And so I think that was kind of the first demonstration, was how do I tell the story of the importance and the passion behind nursing home transitions into the community, but how do I put numbers in it so that policymakers who don't understand this passion, how can they find it relevant? I think a barrier in folks with disabilities buying into research is maybe the medical model having a heavy influence on some of the research and data collected. I think folks with disabilities are pretty distrusting of medical anything, because sometimes medical providers don't have the best interest for people with disabilities in mind when they're providing medical care. So what's to say that the research collected is not only going to benefit them and not us? So I think the distrust is a barrier to folks buying into disability research, data and research. A barrier for researchers trying to study, disability and putting some numbers is that like Sandy said, we don't have enough of our community in the field. And one of the things that, when data collectors go out and collect qualitative or quantitative data, we learned that when it's collecting data on a community that we're not familiar with, there is this whole trust building process that's missing. And so I think that's why there's been an increased call to folks who belong in the community who become researchers and become hired into these big projects, but that hasn't always been the case, and nobody has ever prioritized that as having their own community member conduct the research in a trustworthy way.
So mentorship, what I find interesting about this discussion is you both entered education as disabled students in a non-disability community. My experience was entering it only with disabled students and then gradually entering into it with non-disabled students. And the issue of mentorship, I think, is really important. So are you experiencing people reaching out to you and asking you to be their mentors?
So the Disability Intersectionality Summit, DIS, or DIS for short, started in 2016 with a group of disabled activists from across the country. And we wanted to envision a community space that was for us, by us, but specifically disabled people of color, trans, LGBTQ, BIPOC, and folks who often don't necessarily have a platform or a microphone or have the opportunity to present. And when I say present, I mean ours is a space where we want folks to present on things that they are passionate about, things that they want to have our community learn from or get excited about, not necessarily the latest policy priority or breaking news or a hot button issue. And I think that's what kind of sets this space apart. We're also not an academic conference. So this is really a community space where all the presenters and all the organizers are disabled. But the audience, it's a community, it's open to the public. When I think about mentorship, though, in terms of activism, for instance, the Disability and Intersectionality Summit, often we have young folks who apply to the conference who may not be ready yet necessarily to present, but we also want to support them in their own journey and learning. And so what we have tried to do sometimes is connect them with other young people or other folks in the movement who have been working on similar areas or similar issues that they are interested in, and encouraging them to, apply next year or something. And there are also young people who have applied to the conference where we help coach them through their presentations. So in that way, there's mentorship happening in like just event organizing. But yeah, again, I think that the way that we understand mentorship is also just another form of community building. That's the way I see it.
I've learned much from you. I'm sure the audience has also. And we need to continue to follow you for all the great work that you continue to do. So thank you both very much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Teresa.
History won't forget us or try to minimize our pain, and so why